My name is Isabelle Bennett, and what was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life, my college graduation dinner, turned into a nightmare I will never forget. We were seated in an upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of San Diego, where the warm golden lights reflected off delicate wine glasses and pristine white tablecloths. Everyone was there. Relatives had driven in from Los Angeles, college friends flew back from as far as Seattle. Even Aunt Maria, whom I've always adored, cleared her work schedule just to be there. My father, David, looked as polished as ever in a navy blue suit, his face calm but his eyes cold as frost. My mother, Linda, sat beside him, lips blood red, gaze razor sharp. Emily, my younger sister, beamed with a radiant smile, her golden curls neatly tucked behind her ear, her red sequin dress sparkling under the candlelight. Dinner stretched on in polite, artificial pleasantries. People asked about my plans after graduating with a software engineering degree from UC Berkeley, about the position I'd just accepted at a tech company in Palo Alto. I answered just enough, smiled politely, trying to ignore the hollow feeling deep inside me, a familiar emptiness that always surfaced during celebrations that lacked genuine warmth. Just as the panna cotta was being served, my father placed a brown folder on the table, right in front of me. No introduction, no smile. He looked straight at me and said slowly, "Your grandfather left that inheritance because he thought you would do the right thing. You have a stable job now. Emily is just getting started. Sign it, prove you're still part of this family." I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. I met his eyes, then glanced at my mother, arms crossed, staring at me like a teacher waiting for a student to fail a recitation. Emily tilted her head slightly, smiling like a runway model, full of confidence and smug certainty. "No," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. Just one word, but it shattered the icy civility that coated the table. My father stood, eyes burning with barely contained fury. He reached into his leather bag and pulled out something I couldn't believe, my graduation diploma, laminated, with my name, the university seal, and the dean's signature. He held it up, then flicked open a lighter. In seconds, a blue flame licked the edge of the paper, then burst upward in the soft breeze of the air conditioning. The entire table fell silent. A spoon dropped. Someone gasped. Someone raised their phone, unclear if to film or call the police. "You don't deserve the money your grandfather left," he said, eyes never leaving the fire. My mother didn't stop him. Emily still smiled, but now there was a trace of unease in her eyes. I watched the diploma turn to ash and felt nothing. No rage, no fear, no sorrow. I simply stood, smoothed my dress, picked up my purse, and walked away, leaving behind a table frozen in place and faces that didn't yet realize the real battle had only just begun. I exited the restaurant through the side door, where the streetlights cast a shimmer across the damp pavement, still slick from the afternoon rain. The night wind from San Diego Bay blew softly, rustling the hem of my dress, but I didn't feel cold, I only felt light. A cold, hollow lightness, as if I had finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for 23 years. I called an Uber and rode to Aunt Maria's small apartment in Hillcrest, where I knew there would be no questioning, no pressure to explain, no tired platitudes about understanding your parents. She had sent just one message as I left the dinner. "Doors unlocked. Chamomile tea is in the top cupboard, and you don't have to be strong anymore if you're tired." Then, that night, I lay on the familiar soft sofa, the gentle amber light from the corner lamp casting a mist-like glow across the ceiling. In my hand was a silent phone. No messages from Mom, no calls from Dad. Just a few social media notifications, congratulatory posts, and pictures of people toasting to their achievements. I turned off the screen, set the phone down, and then the memories, uninvited, began to return slowly, rolling in like an old film reel. I remembered being 12, selected for the national round of a federal math competition. I came home beaming, eager to tell Mom, who was picking out dresses for Emily to wear to a birthday party hosted by a classmate from her international school. She glanced briefly at my certificate, then said calmly, "Good, but stop skipping dinner, okay? Being skinny isn't pretty." I folded the certificate neatly, put it in my desk drawer, and never mentioned it again. I remembered being 15, awarded a full scholarship to a summer science research camp at Stanford. Dad refused to take me, said work was too busy. A week later, he drove 7 hours to Los Angeles for a teen fashion conference Emily was attending, because it's a good networking opportunity for her. I booked a Greyhound bus myself, curled up for 9 hours on the overnight ride, clutching my backpack while my heart felt hollow. Throughout my childhood and teenage years, Emily was the centerpiece of every dinner conversation. She was the creative, delicate, feminine daughter my mother had always dreamed of. And me, the too serious, quiet, unpolished one, always felt like a misplaced puzzle piece in the picture-perfect family they presented to the world. I learned not to expect anything. Not birthday gifts. Not kind words. Not someone asking, "Are you okay?" I survived through silence, circuit boards, algorithms, and the familiar corner of the library after every school day. Aunt Maria was the only one who never tried to change me. She never asked why I didn't wear dresses, didn't wear makeup, didn't go to weekend parties. Instead, when I was 16, she bought me an old laptop and said, "Break whatever you want as long as you learn how to put it back together afterward." And from those words, I fell in love with engineering. I began to explore coding, build circuits, and piece together fragments of my self-worth through national competition wins no one in my family ever acknowledged. I also remembered my grandfather, the only man in the family who ever looked at me as if I was a real person, not a flawed version of someone else. One afternoon, while he was mowing the backyard, I brought him a glass of water. We sat under the old orange tree, and he said something I would never forget. "One day, you'll know who your real family is." I asked him, "Why do you say that?" He just chuckled softly, eyes gleaming with the weight of his years, and replied, "Let people paint their masks. When they fall off, you'll know when it's time to act. And remember, you don't have to shout to be heard." End of 4. As I lay back on that sofa, wearing one of Aunt Maria's old t-shirts, the soft jazz she played drifting in from the kitchen, I knew I no longer needed my parents' validation to become someone. I had made it this far without a guiding hand. And now, I was stepping into the hardest part, keeping my promise to Grandpa, watching every mask fall, and standing firm, as the only one who had nothing to hide. I woke up the next morning beneath the soft sunlight filtering through Aunt Maria's curtains, and for the first time in a long while, I felt an unfamiliar calm. There were no lingering cracks beneath the surface like after past arguments with my family this time. Something was different. I knew I was no longer bound by silence swallowed with tears, no longer clinging to validation from people who had never truly seen me. I understood why I hadn't screamed last night. I understood why, when my father burned the diploma I'd worked 4 years to earn, I simply stood, smiled, and walked away. That calm didn't come from despair. It came from a quiet preparation that had been growing inside me for years, ever since the day my grandfather looked at me and said, "You have to learn to stand at the back of the line, so that one day, when they think you're no longer a threat, their true faces will show." A month after he passed, I had a private meeting with Mr. Harris, my grandfather's longtime lawyer, a man my family had all but forgotten, dismissing him as just an old paperwork advisor. His office was in Santa Monica, about a 2.5-hour drive from San Diego, if traffic was light. That day, I took the afternoon off, drove down from Palo Alto, and stepped into a room blanketed in documents, where Mr. Harris was already waiting with the latest draft of the will. My grandfather had quietly amended everything, signed it, and ensured all papers were notarized in front of 3 witnesses. Specifically, he had left me full executive shares in the tech company he'd founded back in 1983, a company that was still running well, albeit underdeveloped, since my father had little interest in technology. He left me the house in Del Mar, the very house my parents currently lived in and believed to be their own. In addition, there were 3 rental properties in Orange County and a small ranch in Riverside where he used to take me when the family still pretended to be whole. My family had never seen these assets as important, because to them, Isabelle would never do anything meaningful with them anyway. At a family gathering last year, when Aunt Maria jokingly asked, "So, what's Grandpa leaving Isabelle?" My mother half joked, half meant it. Maybe his old programming notebooks. That would be fitting. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But Grandpa didn't. That night, after everyone had left, he pulled me into the backyard and said, "Don't let them teach you to underestimate yourself." I've carried that sentence like armor ever since. Deep down, I think he'd grown tired of watching my father, a once promising finance student, turn into a man who pandered to his youngest daughter's whims, willing to betray the values he'd built his life on for the sake of family harmony. He saw my mother, once a sharp accountant, now reduced to a woman who lived off appearances and hollow social connections, organizing tea parties and writing Instagram bios for Emily. They didn't belittle me because I failed, they belittled me because I succeeded in ways they couldn't parade around. No glamour shots, no elegant dresses, no rehearsed speeches. Just a girl, wearing glasses, who liked to code and knew her worth didn't need to look like anyone else's. During the weeks following my grandfather's funeral, my parents remained convinced that the will had been finalized the year before. They'd seen a preliminary version, the one I had deliberately allowed them to glimpse, in which I was only mentioned as the recipient of a modest trust fund meant to support a potential master's degree. They believed that was all there was. They thought I was the obedient child, the one who didn't fight back. But what they didn't know was that even Mr. Harris had once been my grandfather's student, mentored like a son, and he would never let the true will fall into the hands of those who didn't deserve it. I stayed silent. I told no one, not even Aunt Maria, until every document had been sealed. I went to work as usual, attended my graduation like any other student. I smiled when my mother said, "After today, you should start thinking about marriage instead of all that tech stuff." I said thank you when my father gave me a fake congratulatory pat on the shoulder. I listened as Emily talked about opening a gallery in La Jolla, adding, "I'm going to ask Mom to buy one of Grandpa's properties to decorate it properly." I nodded. I said nothing, because I knew the moment of unmasking was drawing near. And this time, I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to argue. All I needed was an empty chair in the lawyer's office, a recorded session, and a signed, sealed copy of the will. The rest? I would let them reveal themselves. Just as Grandpa had taught me. Silence isn't weakness. Silence is what gives the final word its undeniable weight. After the graduation dinner that ended with the flames devouring my college diploma, I thought my silence had spoken loudly enough for them to finally understand. But I had underestimated their capacity for self-delusion and manipulation. Before I could even change out of the dress wrinkled from a night spent on the sofa, my phone began to buzz repeatedly, a string of texts from Emily, each one short, smug, and condescending. "Thanks, sis. I'll redecorate your childhood bedroom soon. Maybe I'll turn it into my walk-in closet. Hope you don't mind. Also, I'm thinking blush pink walls. So not your style, lol." I stared at the words without feeling anything. No anger, no sadness. Just a cold emptiness down my spine, like watching an old version of myself being distorted in someone else's hands. That room was the only part of that house that had ever truly been mine. It was where I wrote my first essay, assembled my first circuit board, and cried my first tears after getting rejected from MIT. It hadn't been a home for a long time. But Emily still thought that taking it over would break me. Before I could even delete the texts, I received an email from my father. Long. Very long. So long the email app had to truncate it with a "read more" button. In it, he called me stubborn and lacking humility, said I was selfish and lacking family spirit, and concluded with, "You have a degree and a job. You should learn to share. Your sister is still struggling to find her footing." Not a single apology for what happened the night before. Not one sentence acknowledging he had been wrong. Just line after line crafted to lay guilt at my feet, as if I had ruined a perfect plan everyone agreed on, everyone except me. Then came the calls from Mom. 3 times. 4. I finally answered. And within the first few minutes, it was clear. She wasn't calling to ask if I was okay. Not to apologize, she was begging. "It's just a signature, Isabelle, she said, her voice damp like tears were sliding down her cheeks. You have a job already, and your sister. She needs a head start. I know last night was a bit much, but your father was just angry. Don't hold it against him. I bit my lip hard to keep from laughing. Half from disbelief, half from pain. So, in their minds, everything was still under control. They still believed I was the obedient daughter, that with enough tears, enough persuasion, enough family is everything. I would nod and sign like I always had. All these years, they taught me that if I wanted to avoid trouble, it was best to stay quiet and agree. But not this time. I didn't reply to anyone after that. I turned off my phone, opened my laptop, and sent the only email I would send that day. A scanned copy of the true will to Aunt Maria. With one line of text. You're the only one I trust. 30 minutes later, she called. No questions about why I hadn't told her sooner. No scolding. She simply said, "So, it's time then, huh?" I whispered, "Yes." She paused, then added, "All right, let them finally see who they tried to bury." The next morning, Mr. Harris, the elderly lawyer, meticulous like a Swiss watchmaker, sent me a confirmation email. The will reading would take place next week, at the main office in Santa Monica. The date and time had been finalized. Invitations had been sent to all relevant parties, including my parents, Emily, and other potential beneficiaries of the old will. I sat in Aunt Maria's tiny kitchen, took a sip of lukewarm peppermint tea, and closed my eyes. I knew. The time had come. Their game was nearly over. And I, the one who had stayed silent for 23 years, wouldn't need to say much at all. I only needed to show up, with the right folder in my hand. Let the truth speak for itself. Let the masks fall one by one. The air in the law office conference room had thickened, dense enough to slice through in layers. I could hear the soft hum of the ceiling vent and the faint rustle of paper as Mr. Harris turned each page of the thick stack in front of him. Outside the glass wall, the sky over Santa Monica was a sharp, cloudless blue. The palm trees swayed lazily in the sun, completely indifferent to the storm unfolding inside. My family sat across from me, my parents, Emily, and a few close relatives, all wearing expressions of certainty, as if they were already savoring their victory. They came here expecting a formality, confident that I'd receive a couple of sentimental keepsakes, maybe a small scholarship fund, and quietly slip away, as I had in the past. But as Mr. Harris began reading the opening lines of the official will, the room seemed to collectively hold its breath. I, Henry Bennett, being of sound mind and full mental capacity, hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament. Mr. Harris read slowly, each word striking the wooden floor like a gavel. All eyes were on him except mine. I stared straight at my family, unblinking. I wanted to witness the exact moment when every mask began to fall. I hereby leave the full executive shares of Bennett Tech Solutions, the property in Del Mar, 3 real estate holdings in Orange County and Riverside, the entirety of my investment portfolio at Charles Schwab, and all remaining fixed and liquid assets. To my granddaughter Isabelle Bennett, the only person I trust to preserve and grow the legacy I spent my life building. For a second, the silence in the room was so sharp I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Then, like a sudden gust of wind, everything shattered. My mother froze, her hand clenched on her lap until the knuckles turned white. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but nothing came out. My father shot up from his chair, slamming his hands on the table so hard Mr. Harris's pen flew off and clattered to the floor. Impossible. This is forged. Henry would never leave everything to her. He roared, as if volume alone could erase a truth that had already been signed, notarized, and witnessed by 3 completely independent parties. Emily, who should have known to stay silent, couldn't hold back. She screamed, high-pitched and jarring, enough to make the aunt beside her jump in her seat. What? I already put a deposit on the gallery. I already paid for the lease. What am I supposed to do now? Her voice cracked and trembled mid-sentence, like a child realizing the toy she thought was hers had never belonged to her in the first place. I didn't move. No reaction. No anger, no words. I simply watched them. I looked at my mother, the woman who once said I lacked charm and couldn't represent the family. I looked at my father, the man who mocked my field of study as a nerd's hobby, unworthy of his pride. I looked at Emily, the sister who once told me, at 16, you should learn how to dress before you learn how to be a person. I didn't look at them to gloat, I looked to remember. To etch into my memory the moment truth stood bare. The moment they had nowhere left to retreat, no words left to twist, no one left to salvage the dignity that had already shattered. Mr. Harris calmly turned another page. And, according to the expressed wishes of Mr. Henry Bennett, any individuals currently residing in the aforementioned properties without legal ownership shall have 30 days to purchase said properties at market value or vacate them. After this period, full control and discretion over these assets shall belong solely to Miss Isabelle Bennett. This time, my mother exhaled sharply, as if someone had punched her in the stomach. My father collapsed back into his chair, his shoulders slumping in a way I had never seen before. Emily bowed her head and whispered under her breath, but I heard it clearly. No, no way, I just started. I said nothing. Just as Grandpa had once told me, never argue with someone who won't listen. Let the truth do its job. They used to say I was too rational. But it was precisely that rationality that brought me here today. And them with all their emotions, manipulation, and belief that I'd always obey now sat among ruins. And this was only the beginning of the truth being revealed. The air in the room thickened even more, like a fragile balloon on the verge of bursting with just one wrong move. But instead of escalating the confrontation, Mr. Harris gave a slight nod, then turned toward the large screen mounted on the wall across from the table. And finally, per Mr. Henry Bennett's direct request, he said, I will now play a video message, recorded and stored in our office 3 weeks before his passing. This is a personal message he wished to deliver to everyone present here today. He pressed a button on the remote. The lights in the room dimmed, leaving only the warm glow of the screen as the video came to life. In the frame, my grandfather sat in his familiar wooden chair inside his study at the Delmar house, the one with the wall of books I used to dream of having, where I once sat for hours listening to him lecture about ethics in business, about principles and honor. Though he had grown visibly thinner, his eyes still held that same sharp intensity that had once made seasoned executives hesitate. He wasn't reading from a script, he didn't need one. He simply looked straight into the camera and spoke. If Isabelle is sitting there, he began, his voice deep and steady like stone, then it means she kept her promise to me, to stay silent, until it was truly time to speak. I saw my mother's hand tighten into a fist. My father shifted slightly in his chair, his shoulders tense. And I sat still, eyes fixed on every detail of a face I would never see again in real life. A knot rose in my throat, but I didn't let it surface. I leave this video not to defend anyone, he continued, but to tell the truth. I watched my son David put blood over balance, choosing short-term indulgence over true value. I saw my daughter-in-law Linda turn her back when Isabelle needed acknowledgement the most. And I witnessed Emily, a sweet girl, receive every privilege without ever having to earn it. Emily lowered her head. I couldn't see her face clearly anymore, but I heard the sound of her sharp inhale from just a few seats away. I remember the science fair when Isabelle was 11. She built an autonomous robot model. David, you promised to be there, but instead, you drove Emily to an art competition at some after-school center. I stood there, in a crowd of unfamiliar parents, watching my granddaughter drag her entire display table by herself. His voice paused, as if swallowing something heavy. I remember the night Isabelle received the statewide scholarship at 17. No one from the family showed up. She stood alone on stage, holding the certificate, her eyes quietly searching the audience. I was in the back of the auditorium. I saw her fold the paper the moment she stepped down and slip it into the pocket of her coat, where no one would ever see it. My hand instinctively brushed the edge of my coat. I still remembered that pale gray jacket. I still had that certificate, folded exactly the way I did that day, never once shown to anyone. Emily is a sweet child, he continued, his voice softening. But Isabelle is the only one in this family who understands that true strength doesn't lie in shouting but in persistence. Not everyone needs applause to be worthy. Not everyone needs a spotlight to shine. Isabelle never chased the light, but when she walks into a room, everything shifts, because she has presence. She has resolve, she has loyalty to herself. And that, above all, makes her deserving. And footnote. I heard a soft sob from my mother's side. It could have been crying, or just the suffocating weight of something finally breaking loose. As for my father, the man who had always sat straight-backed, chin high, he now bowed his head, hand pressed to his forehead, silent. Grandpa paused again, then looked directly into the camera. If you're sitting there, David and Linda, know that this was a deliberate choice. Not driven by emotion, not out of favoritism, but because of merit. End of chapter. His gaze felt like it pierced through the screen, touching each one of us in the room. And, Isabelle, if you're watching this, then I have only one thing to say: I'm proud of you. Not for what you've received, but because you never lost yourself to get it. The screen faded to black. The lights in the room brightened again. No one spoke. No one even breathed loudly. The room was as silent as a graveyard. I didn't cry. I didn't smile in triumph. Just a small smile, like a ripple across still water. Because I knew Grandpa had seen me all along. In a family where I once felt invisible, there had always been one person who was watching. And today, he spoke for me. While they scrambled over every line in the will, every square foot of property, every signature, he, the only one who no longer needed anything, was the only one who said exactly what I needed to hear. You don't need to scream to prove your worth. You've been worthy all along. Allure tag. It wasn't a victory. It was a return. To myself. After the video ended, the lights in the conference room came back on, but no one spoke. It was as if every sound had been drained from the space. No more sharp inhales, no more fingers tapping nervously on the polished table like in the tense moments at the start. Only silence, so heavy it made the ticking of the wall clock painfully loud. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't need to, because I knew they were all looking at me. I gently pushed my chair back and stood, my hand resting on the folder I had carried in since the beginning. My voice rang out, not loud, not sharp, but clear and steady, like the chime of metal echoing through an empty hall. I have a few announcements to make. In my capacity as the sole heir to the executive shares of Bennett Tech Solutions, and as the direct successor to the expressed will of Mr. Henry Bennett. My father shifted in his seat, about to speak, but I raised my hand firmly. You should hear everything first. I walked to the head of the table, where Mr. Harris respectfully stepped aside to give me space. I opened the folder, pulled out copies of my prepared plans, printed charts and summaries, and began distributing them to everyone present, including shareholders and legal representatives. Over the past 3 years, I began, under the leadership of Mr. David Bennett, this company has posted losses for 3 consecutive quarters, surrendered more than 27% of its market share to competitors, experienced an employee turnover rate exceeding 45%, and lost or failed to renew its 3 largest contracts. I held up the data, clear graphs, detailed figures, financial analysis I had spent countless nights compiling. While they were busy throwing celebration dinners for their fashion student daughter, I had quietly interned at the family company every summer. I had been there riding the elevators, listening to employees vent, documenting outdated procedures, and watching my father sign deals based more on relationships than qualifications. This company is dying, not because of the market, but because of a leadership model built on nepotism where friends and relatives are placed in executive positions without any real expertise. I paused for a moment and looked directly into my father's eyes. For the first time, he didn't look at me with disdain or superiority. His expression was harder to read, like someone who had just been jolted awake from a decade-long dream. Today, I continued, I am formally announcing the full restructuring plan for Bennett Tech Solutions, starting with the board of directors. Any position currently held by a family member without a verified professional track record will be vacated within 30 days. We will initiate a merit-based, transparent recruitment process, overseen by an independent evaluation board. Oh. The shareholders' secretary nodded as I distributed the new hiring criteria documents that had already been prepared and validated by our audit partner. I hadn't come here empty-handed. I had come as a true successor. In addition, I went on. We will be expanding research and development into renewable energy, specifically, the initiative my grandfather once proposed, but which was shelved. Our focus will be on nanomaterial-based energy storage solutions, a field in which I've already published 2 papers in IEEE. I heard murmurs behind me, not from my family, but from shareholders. For the first time, there was a genuine flicker of hope in the room, a sense that the company might actually have a future again. And finally, I said, lifting my head and locking eyes with my father once more, I am officially launching a profit-sharing program for all employees, a vision my grandfather first proposed back in 2008, but one that was dismissed. Starting next quarter, 15% of net profit will be distributed based on departmental performance and contribution. My father looked like he wanted to rise from his seat again, but the effort seemed to leave him winded. He dropped back down, deflated. My mother turned away, her gaze unfocused, like someone who just realized she no longer had a place in the story she thought she was starring in. I ended my presentation with a simple, final sentence. We cannot continue running a tech company with a family dinner table mindset. My grandfather did not leave us this legacy so we could turn it into a dining room. I sat down. Mr. Harris gave a small, approving nod. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own family. I didn't need their nods. I didn't need anyone to stand and applaud. Because I wasn't speaking to be validated. I was speaking to begin. A new chapter. One without them, but with me. And with the path my grandfather had laid out for me since the very first time he taught me how to assemble a circuit board on that old dining table when I was 10. After I presented the full restructuring plan and unraveled every thread of outdated power they once used to bind the company and me, the room sank into a suffocating silence. My father slumped in his chair, his hands limp in his lap, unable to say a word. My mother had turned her face away, her eyes lost, her complexion pale beneath makeup that could no longer mask her confusion and shock. Emily still hadn't raised her head since the will was read, as if refusing to look would make reality disappear on its own. I stood again. No need to tap the table, no need to call for attention. They were all already silent. And they knew I was going to speak. But perhaps they didn't expect what I was about to say, not an offer, not a second chance, not some sentimental family movie ending. This wasn't Hollywood, this was real life. And in real life, not everyone deserves forgiveness just because they come back asking for it. I looked directly at my parents, my voice calm, cold. There will be no junior positions, no buying back the house, no negotiations. There are no backward steps for those who've taken 100 forward without once turning around to see who is left behind. My mother opened her mouth, trying to speak, but I cut her off, not with volume, but with a look. For the first time in my life, they didn't have the power to interrupt me. I didn't need them to listen so they could rationalize my feelings, I just needed them to sit there and receive it. We had so many chances, I said, each word hitting like a fist against the wall they'd built out of excuses. The first was when I was 11, and Dad didn't show up to my science fair. The second was when you forgot my 16th birthday because you were baking a cake for Emily's slash. The third was the statewide scholarship ceremony. I stood alone on that stage while you two were in Palm Springs, celebrating her opening a painting class. My father turned his face away. I knew he remembered each of those moments. They might have said they were busy, or it wasn't on purpose, but memory doesn't lie. And today, those memories had become a mirror they could no longer avoid. And the last one, I said, lowering my voice, was when you burned my college diploma. In front of everyone. Because I refused to sign a one-sided transfer agreement you tried to sell as reasonable. Another long silence. I didn't try to fill it with tears. I no longer needed to make a point or win them over. I was simply stating the truth. The kind of truth that, if left unsaid, would keep dragging me back into a cycle of submission, guilt, and compromise. At that moment, my father looked up, his eyes red, though he struggled to keep his voice low and steady. "Are you really going to cut us off?" I looked at him not with anger, and not with pity. Just a tiredness that had ripened over years. "I'm not angry," I replied slowly. "But I also don't need a family that only sees me as a walking wallet. I'm not an ATM, I'm not a resume with legs. I'm not a shadow for someone else to shine beside. If your love only exists when I'm obedient, then it's not family, it's a transaction." My mother broke into tears. Whether it was from heartbreak, loss, or the realization that there was nothing left to hold on to, I didn't know. But I didn't step forward, I didn't offer comfort. I didn't wipe her tears like I used to when I was little, because now I understood I was no longer responsible for healing a family system that never saw me as its center. I turned to Mr. Harris. "Please assist with all remaining matters related to assets, personnel, and legal documentation in the coming week. I'll sign whatever is needed right after this meeting." Mr. Harris nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and quiet sorrow, the kind of look from someone who had watched a child be quietly stifled for years, now finally standing tall and walking forward on her own. I gathered my papers and carefully placed them into my leather bag. No one stopped me. No one called my name. And I didn't look back. Because what needed to be said had been said. What needed to be faced had been faced. And what needed to end I had ended. Not with rage. Not with revenge. But with a calm, final departure and no need to turn around. Not forgiveness, just the act of saving myself. 3 months after that reading meeting, I was sitting on the 5th-floor balcony of my small apartment tucked away in Willow Glen, on the southern edge of San Jose. In front of me, a row of maple trees were slowly turning pale yellow, swaying gently in the autumn light of California. The ceramic mug in my hand was still warm, the faint scent of peppermint rising in delicate curls of steam. At my feet, the rescue cat I'd adopted lay curled up and asleep, as if the world had never hurt anyone. This is where I live alone. In the apartment my grandfather quietly left for me. Not large. Not luxurious. But enough. Enough for me to feel safe. It's nearly 700 kilometers from San Diego, far enough that I never have to worry about surprise visits, close enough to catch a short flight if the company needs me. But to be honest, no one needs me to leave this place because I've turned the Bennett Tech San Jose branch into the beating heart of its revival. The new office sat at the heart of Silicon Valley's tech district, where dreams were written in code and the future etched onto circuit boards. I wasn't just the executive director here, I was the one who personally designed the roadmap to overhaul the company's outdated infrastructure, from internal management software to AI-driven market prediction systems. I didn't hire based on shiny resumes, but on how people thought. I hosted brainstorming sessions where hierarchy didn't matter, where junior engineers could challenge management without being met with glares or dismissive silence. And I saw the results. Employees stayed longer. Clients returned. Some who had left out of frustration with the old family-led leadership found their way back, asking for a second chance. I welcomed them on one condition. They had to believe in the values I was building, not just cling to the nostalgia of a chair they once held. I didn't get messages from my father. No calls from my mother. Not a word from Emily. They disappeared as if we had never belonged to the same family. But strangely, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel abandoned. On the contrary, I felt at peace. A deep kind of peace, a kind of lightness that didn't depend on anyone. I no longer had to ask permission to go anywhere. I no longer had to report every decision I made just because it didn't align with their expectations. I no longer woke up with guilt for succeeding, or felt the need to explain why I didn't call home on Thanksgiving, or listen to anyone say, "You should be more understanding of your sister." I cooked for myself. Decorated the apartment the way I liked, simple, filled with greenery, and without a single family photo. Except one. A small frame on my desk, a photo of Grandpa and me, taken one winter morning in front of the old house, when I was 13, proudly holding up the first robot I ever built by myself. In the picture, he's looking at me with a smile like I'd just invented something that would change the world. I started rewriting my routines. Riding an e-bike to work in the morning. Dropping by the local public library in the afternoon. Coming home in the evening to read a mix of engineering manuals and science fiction novels. Sometimes I listen to podcasts about family psychology not to reopen wounds, but to remind myself that I wasn't alone. That there were many others who also had to walk away from what was labeled blood in order to truly find themselves. One evening, as I was working late, I received an email from HR letting me know that the junior engineering team had just completed the first prototype for our renewable energy technology, the very project my grandfather once dreamed of. They named it Henry I, without me ever suggesting it. They did it because they understood he wasn't just a founder, he was the spirit of a generation that placed principle above power. And me. I was simply carrying that spirit forward in my own way. I stayed in the office for a long time that night. I didn't turn on the lights. I let the glow from my computer screen wash over my face, casting shadows in my eyes that now belonged to someone who had finally learned how to live without needing to be accepted. And for the first time in my life, I understood that healing isn't about returning to what's familiar. It's about learning to walk forward alone and still being able to smile, truly smile. I haven't forgiven. But I no longer need the anger to survive. And, to me, that is freedom. That afternoon, as the office quieted down, keyboards silencing, phone calls ending, I sat alone without turning on the lights. I let the soft amber of sunset slide through the wide glass windows, resting on the dark wood of my desk. No sound from the printer. No footsteps in the hallway, just the ticking of the wall clock and the faint rustling of the trees outside. I leaned back in my chair, fingers interlaced across my chest, my gaze falling to the corner of the desk where I kept the only two things unrelated to work, a framed photograph and a small ash-gray wooden box. In the photo was my grandfather, sitting on a bench in the garden, wrapped in a wine-colored sweater, hand resting on his cane, his eyes squinting in the sun, but his smile warm, radiant, real. I took that photo when I was 18, just after he handed me a new toolkit and said, "No one hands you a place. You have to step up and claim it, but once you do, be the one who stands firm even if no one claps." Beside the frame was the small wooden box I had placed on the shelf the day I moved to San Jose. Inside were the remains from that graduation dinner. The ashes of my software engineering degree burned by my father right in front of me, his eyes locked on mine as he spat out words colder than the flames curling up my name. "You don't deserve your grandfather's money." I once thought I would throw away what remained of that diploma. But one night, while sorting through old boxes, I picked up the ashes, placed them in a box, and kept them with me. Not as a symbol of pain, but as proof. Proof that I had walked through something that should have broken me, and kept walking. I looked at my grandfather's photo one more time and whispered, "I chose myself, Grandpa." I didn't know what I expected from that moment, a stronger gust of wind, a phantom touch on my shoulder, a wave of relief bursting in my chest. None of that came. Only silence. But in that silence, I didn't feel alone. Because I finally understood. I didn't win because they lost. I won because I stopped trying to become someone I wasn't just to be accepted. I won because I stopped living by their expectations and started living by my own beliefs. I didn't need to walk into a room with a nameplate to have someone look up and notice me. I only needed to know that I was walking each day with integrity without abandoning myself, without retracting my truth just to keep others comfortable. For a long time, I believed love was something you had to earn. That you had to try harder, achieve more, prove you were worthy. But I've come to realize, love isn't something you win. It's something you're given. And if they don't give it, you have the right to give it to yourself. I learned how to care for myself the way I once cared for difficult equations, buggy lines of code, unfinished tech ideas. I learned how to soothe myself at night when old memories came knocking. I learned how to say no without guilt. How to decline without apology. How to stand alone without feeling small. And I learned how to walk forward without looking back, without letting regret pull me off course. A child who isn't chosen isn't a child abandoned. She's someone who stood up from the very place she was once forgotten. And now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I turned off the lights, left the office, and walked down the stairs like I had on so many evenings before. No flashbulbs, no ceremony, no applause, just the sound of my own footsteps steady, strong, and free.